Many of you that are parents, you get that late night phone call sometimes. Well, you hope you don't get that late night phone call at least. And when you get that late night phone call, it's probably something going on with your children. Well, last night, 5G America staff got that late night phone call. And unfortunately, it was Commissioner Rosenworcel's staff explaining that if you look at the northeast weather pattern, and what happened was she was stuck in New York. So what happened was she really wanted to be here. She really wanted to give the keynote address. But due to the northeast weather pattern, she wasn't able to get out of New York to get here this morning. But we were very fortunate because her legal counselor, legal advisor, who is on both wireless and international, was on a different flight. He was flying out of Washington, D.C. And he did agree to do a short fireside chat with me just to explain a little bit about where the FCC is on some of these issues on 5G and spectrum, and even some of the mechanics of the FCC. So I'd like you to welcome to the stage Mr. Umair Javed, legal advisor for Wireless International for Commissioner Jessica Rosenworcel.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Well, thank you very much for, as we say in baseball, you're the pinch hitter?
That's right, exactly. Thank you.
Yeah.
Happy to be here.
Yeah.
And again, on behalf of the commissioner, let me just say she does want me to extend her apologies. She really wanted to be here, was very excited to come here and kick off this event. It's the 5th global event. I understand it's the first one hosted in this hemisphere, so she was very excited about that. But I am happy to be here and honored to be representing her today.
Great. Well, thank you. We will get to a few audience questions as well. But I want to start out to say, we, as an industry, we have standards at 3GPP, but we also go to ITU for World Radio Conference. And we have one coming up, WORC 19. So what would be the U.S. types of priorities that you see, in your opinion, that the U.S. will be pushing at that? Because it's the first time that 5G spectrum's really been out there.
That's exactly right. I think the 2019 World Radio Communication Conference is especially important because it is going to be the first conference that will look at spectrum for 5G. In 2015, the conference looked at spectrum under 6 gigahertz. In 2019, we're going to look at spectrum between 24 and 86 gigahertz, and that's important because that's a spectrum. When we think about 5G, we look at that as a launching pad for 5G service. So we need to get up there. We need to get out there and start looking at those spectrums. Ideally, I think if we go to work, the goal is let's globally harmonize the spectrum we're using for 5G because that's going to create economies of scale, and that's a good thing. But I think in some cases, when we start looking high, there will probably be some cases where the United States will go at it alone. Mm-hmm. And the 28 gigahertz is a great example of that. That was a band that was left off the table in 2015, unfortunately, as a band for 5G. But it has a global mobile allocation, so we're going to move ahead with it. Other countries are doing the same. South Korea and Japan are also looking at the 28 gigahertz for 5G, and so we're excited about that band. I would say the United States was also the first country to identify the 37 and 39 gigahertz bands for 5G. Right. And the good news there is that those bands are on the study list for WORC 19, and so I think let's find a way forward there. At the FCC, we've started our preparations. We started 2.5 years ago. As soon as the 2015 work ended, we started putting together a coalition to start preparing for the next one. So we're taking input from the private sector. We're working with the Department of State to collaborate with our neighbors, Canada, Mexico, the rest of the CTEL region. And we're keeping in touch with the other regions from the Asia-Pacific telecommunity, the Arab states, the African Telecommunication Union. I think that conversation is going to be very important as we head into the work.
So optimistic about the bands that you want to push for the United States?
You know, it's hard not to be optimistic about 5G, about any aspect of it. Okay. So yes, I'm absolutely optimistic. I think we're going to start, we're still looking at more bands for 5G in the United States. We want to make sure that there's a strong pipeline, and I think that's going to include things like the 26 6 gigahertz band, which I know there's a lot of focus in Europe around that band as well. So I am optimistic. I think that we're going to get some good harmonized bands out of the work.
Okay. Well, since you mentioned it, the millimeter wave and the 28, we have an auction coming up in November for many of you that know in the room and some that don't. What's your opinion or the commissioner's opinion, since you work for Commissioner
Sure.
Rosenworcel, on how that auction should be designed and in what way?
Absolutely.
Or any kind of big picture thoughts about it?
Sure. So let me start by saying that the commissioner has been very aggressive in pushing for an auction, for a high band auction. The United States was very early out of the gate in terms of identifying spectrum for 5G. Since then, we've watched a lot of other countries start planning auctions, right? That includes South Korea, Japan, Germany, the United Kingdom, Romania. All of these countries have auctions planned for 2018 of spectrum for 5G. In the United States, we had some difficulties. We're past them now, and we're excited that the chairman has announced an auction of the 28 gigahertz band in November. We're going to follow that with the 24 gigahertz band shortly afterwards. I think that's a good start. But I would say I think there's two things that the commissioner would say that we need to be thinking about when we're designing our auctions and thinking about how we're getting this spectrum to the market. The first is that the commissioner wants to see more certainty about what comes next, about what happens after 28 and 24 gigahertz band. And she's put out a very simple idea of how we can do that, and that's a calendar. So let's put together a calendar that announces to the entire wireless ecosystem, from the service providers to the equipment manufacturers to the vendors, exactly when and how we're going to push spectrum out to the market. And that way we can organize everyone around actually getting something done in these bands. So that's the first thing. Let's put a calendar together. The second thing, I think, is let's think about how we can move some of these bands together. Because we're in the United States, we're looking at the bands that we have, and we've got the 24 gigahertz band, the 28 gigahertz band, the 37 gigahertz, 39 gigahertz, and 47 gigahertz bands all ready for auction.
Yeah.
And the point is that's a lot. And if you look at these airwaves, I think a lot of people feel that a lot of the spectrum can serve as complements or substitutes for each other. And so if we, instead of doing these auctions one by one by one, what if we started moving them together? That could generate more interest in our auctions. Right. It could allow bidders to watch what's happening in real time in our auctions and decide what bands are actually best for them. And those are important things, I think. From the agency's perspective, it might be easier to go one by one. Right. But I think for spectrum policy, the commissioner would say that let's think about moving some of these bands together.
Yeah. So the simple idea is a calendar. Get it
calendar.
all down so all the bidders have an idea, and then people can do their strategies of how they want to use that wireless spectrum, knowing what's going to be coming up.
That's exactly right. A little bit of predictability and organizing action so that we can actually focus on the bands that are coming and prepare for them and make sure we're ready to move on them when they're made available.
Okay, great. We have another auction that, speaking of calendar, I think we're working on the calendar, what's called a 3.5 gigahertz or CBRS band, which is much different in the United States. We're, a little bit jealous, I think, in some respect for many parts of the world that have a pretty clear 3.5 band. They've already designated that they're going to be doing 5G to it. In the United States, we have a CBRS band, and it obviously rules were made, or it was decided back in 2015. What's the commissioner's thoughts about CBRS band,
Sure.
3.5, and anything else in the big picture on that?
Sure, absolutely. And you're absolutely right. There are some countries that are moving forward with the 3.5 gigahertz band as sort of a macro band for 5G operations. And I hear discussion, well, is the US doing that? How are we going to keep pace in the mid-band? Let me say first that what we did in the CBRS band was very forward-looking, and it was with 5G in mind. So what we did in 3.5 gigahertz is we put in place an unprecedented, multi-tiered spectrum sharing opportunity. And what that means is that we gave the incumbent users a priority right to continue operating. We created priority access licenses to allow new predictable uses in the band with some certainty. And then we opened up the rest of the spectrum for general access, much like our unlicensed bands, which led to the birth of Wi-Fi and have created immense innovation. So a three-tiered framework that allowed for a mix of wireless uses. And what we did is we proposed spectrum access systems to manage all of that wireless traffic. to allow dynamic spectrum sharing, dynamic access to spectrum. And the reasoning behind it is we saw a spectrum crunch. We saw that 5G is going to need a lot more capacity. If we want the speeds for it, we need a lot more bandwidth. And we're not going to get there if we remain crammed on the same spectrum bands that we've always been using. And so we're looking at the high band, we're looking at the mid band, and we're trying to create more sharing opportunities. That's what 3.5 was about. It was about looking forward and preparing for that future. Now, in 2015, we started a rulemaking. And we did that over Commissioner Rosenworcel's objection. And we did it to take another look at the 3.5 gigahertz band. And what we're doing is we're proposing to gut what is most creative about this band. And so we're asking about things like bigger license areas. We're asking about things like longer license terms. And really what we're doing is we're serving up a lot of the same old that we've seen in spectrum policy, and we're replacing the creative policies that we were pursuing in that band. When we talk about 5G, we recognize that there's going to be a lot of different use cases. There's going to be different spectrum that it uses. There's going to be different technical parameters. Everything about 5G is different. But now when we're talking about how we're going to license and regulate the spectrum for 5G, suddenly we're talking about it as if it's no different than the low-band spectrum that we've been dealing with for many years. There's a disconnect there. So I think the commissioner wants to see us get back on track on the 3.5 gigahertz band. She wants to see us move forward with the framework that we adopted in 2015, and that was on a 5-0 vote at the commission. She wants us to move forward quickly, because the fact is 200 experimental authorizations were granted in that band. Millions of dollars have been invested. All of this work has stopped because of this proceeding. We need to get back on track, and we need to do it in a way that keeps what's most innovative about the band and helps us to grow new spectrum interests, because that's very important.
So she's in favor then of the census tracts?
So you know, the license sizes is something that is being debated vigorously right now.
Okay.
And there are multiple proposals on the record. We're reviewing all of them. We'll see where this comes out. There are advantages to the census tract approach.
Okay.
One of them is that, you know, as our wireless carriers grow bigger and fewer in number, we have to focus on growing new spectrum interests that will participate in our auctions. And that's what was exciting about the 3.5 gigahertz band, because when we adopted those small license areas, suddenly we had all this interest from people who had never participated in a spectrum auction. That included companies like GE or other people that wanted to just deploy IoT networks on business campuses or healthcare facilities. And this was very exciting. This was a whole class of new interests who wanted to innovate and use our spectrum and participate in our auctions. We want to encourage that behavior. So wherever we do come out on license sizes, we want to make sure we come out in a place that allows these uses to continue.
Okay. I want to open it up for questions, because we have about 5 minutes left, and I did mention that we would take some questions from the audience. If anyone has any questions. Yeah. Right here, we get a microphone. If not, we'll have to have you shout. Here it comes. And if you could just say your name and who you're with, which I know you, of course.
I'm Jilin Yi from China Mobile. The question, actually, I'm assuming I understood what was described here in terms of positioning and the motivation about 3.5 here in this country. It's just that this is a completely apolitical question, because I genuinely have this question in my mind when I heard this. 1996, there was a Telecom Act. The motivation of many of the content of Telecom Act was to hope that we have hundreds of operators providing telecom services. And we all know what happened after that. And also, you had mentioned that we see the trend of having bigger and fewer providers. This, I'm not sure, is necessarily the wrong thing or the bad thing for our ecosystem. So to have a program trying to encourage large number of spectrum bidders for small areas, small system, and special purpose. Are we really sure this is the right path we want to encourage the ecosystem to take on? It's a genuine question.
Sure.
I really have this question.
No, thank you for your question. It's a very good one. And this is a lot of the discussion about 3.5 gigahertz is what's the best path for it? Do we reserve it for mobile carriers and allow this type of macro power use, or do we do something different? Here's where I come out on it. When we talk about 5G, there's a lot to be excited about. We're not just talking about smartphones anymore. We're talking about connected cars, about connected homes, about Internet of Things, about virtual and augmented realities. I think that 5G just might make smartphones the least interesting thing in mobile. And so to continue spectrum policy in a way that is focused entirely on the smartphone and entirely on our nationwide carriers, I think misses a class of innovation that's really exciting. And so the 3.5 gigahertz is 150 megahertz where we can encourage that kind of innovation, and I think that's worth the effort.
All right. Well, I would just like to say thank you very much. Again, hope that everything's good with Commissioner Rosenworcel, but thank you very much for doing a great job of pinch hitting.
Thank you very much.